One. Hello. My name is Rehan Naik, and with me is.
And I'm Anand Rajani. We will be talking about, in this recording, we'll be talking about Richard Bean's play One Man, Two Guvnors. It's set in 1960s Brighton and it's based on Carlo Goldini's 1743 Commedia dell'arte classic, The Servant of Two Masters, which is set in Venice. One Man, Two Governors is directed by Sir Nicholas Heitner and it premiered in National's Littleton Theatre. This play was recorded during the original 2011 season and was available on YouTube to watch during the National Theatre at Home during the lockdown.
All right, so as you can tell, One Man, Two Governors. By the way, Manan said it, it's a very British play, even though it's based on an Italian original. But yeah, so it's set in 1960s Brighton, and it's about a man named Francis Henschel, and now his two governors become Rachel Crabb and Stanley Stubbs. Now, interestingly, Rachel Crabb is actually posing as her dead twin brother Roscoe Crabb to take money from Roscoe's soon-to-be father-in-law, but well, it won't be because he's dead now, who owed him money. And so she wants to go off to Australia with the love of her life, Stanley Stubbs. Now, Francis, whose current governor is Rachel, gets the opportunity to find another job and gets Stanley Stubbs to be his governor as well. And so now, in this very comedy of errors style, he tries to prevent them from finding out that he has two jobs and tries to keep them separate, nearly causing a double suicide in the end, which is very Romeo and Juliet. But luckily, since this is a light-hearted comedy, they are reunited in the very end.
So this Commedia dell'arte was a popular form of popular theatre that emphasized on ensemble acting. Its improvisations were set in a firm framework of mask and stock situations, and its plot points were frequently borrowed from the classic literary tradition of commedia erudita, or more popularly known as literary drama. It used a combination of phys- uh, physical comedy and strong character archetypes. Here we'll also be talking about how One Man, Two Governors use this physical comedy and strong character archetypes to
Yeah.
ensure it becoming a good, successful play.
Yeah. And so now in the earlier review that's been made of Frankenstein, which you should go and watch, we talked about very specific techniques used and very technical aspects. Here we're going to talk about genre work, which is, of course, commedia dell'arte. Firstly, the main character, this comic servant, also known as Arlecchino, and the Harlequin in commedia dell'arte, was called Truffaldino Batocchio by Goldini in the original play and is now named Francis Henschel for the very British audience. He's part of the Zani, which is the servant class in the commedia. And the Harlequin is supposed to be physically very agile, but mentally rather, well, incompetent is the best way to put this. And because this sort of childish nature of his, he gets entangled in very elaborate plots because he's quite nervous and distractible. And so we'll see this when he fails to realize the connection between both his masters. And in this sort of, immaturity, he causes nearly a double suicide.
Yes, so adding to what Rehan just said, when the character is introduced, his main obsession with food is effectively demonstrated by and he grabs a fistful of nuts, tossing one into the air and catching it in his mouth in the very first scene of the play. He also does nonchalant facial expressions as an acting choice practically throughout. This this feat earns him live cheers from the live audience and generates humor in the beginning of the play.
Yes. And so that's played by James Corden in this version, who's now quite famous as a talk show host. Our second main archetype is a character called Charlie the Duck Clench. Now, Charlie's based on the archetype of the Pantheron, which is this lusty, very penny pinching patriarch. And so he's supposed to be superior in status, but actually he's quite gullible, which is weird because now we've got two quite mentally incompetent characters. But yes, so he's you expect him to be quite mature and stately, but he is gullible and becomes everyone's fool. And now we see this running joke throughout this play of him being unable to differentiate between identical and fraternal twins. And he doesn't realize for the entirety of the play until it's very viscerally beaten into him that Roscoe and Rachel are actually the same person because Roscoe is dead.
Another character which we would like to explore is Dolly, who is in this play Francis's love interest, who, along with Francis, is also part of the lower servant class. In Commedia Columbina, the archetype which Dolly represents is known to be the skillful, wisecracking servant girl, and usually the only source of functional intellect in the play, which is quite ironic considering that she comes from the servant class. In this play, she seems to be a feminist who believes in women empowerment. She has something to say to or about everyone.
And rounding off our list of very contrasting characters, we have Pauline, who's Charlie's daughter, and she originates from the commedia character of Isabella, one of the innamorati, lovers of expensive taste. Unfortunately, she's spoiled and not exactly the brightest character, definitely not the sharpest tool in the shed. And she's shown as being slightly the same with her rich father, and her repetition of "I don't understand" throughout the entire play. But she's also shown to be sympathetic with Stuart Heart of Gold and close confidant of Rachel when she keeps her secret when finding out that she's actually Rachel and not Roscoe Crabbe.
Now we'd also like to talk about another technique that's popular in Commedia dell'arte called lazzi, which are physical or verbal gags. They sometimes add to the plot or relate to current action in the play, whilst other times they have no relevance to the story and just serve as a distraction or a humorous interruption, or could even be used to spotlight a particular character.
For example, I could just suddenly start speaking, and while Manan is actually talking about the plot, I can be talking about something random and dancing in front of you, and that would be a lazzo. Because it's completely irrelevant to the plot, and it's really only a set piece made so that the audience can absolutely have fun while being relevant or irrelevant to the plot, as Manan just said.
Right. A minimal lasso is a quick gag, whereas a maximum lasso can be a brief, full structured scene. The moment where Francis throws a peanut in the air, as I spoke about earlier, is minimal lasso. We'll be speaking about it in minimal lasso.
Yeah, and so this is a scene in a restaurant, and then you see this as a volunteer being picked up from the audience, who's clearly shy at emerge, just quite unwilling to appear on stage, and she's subjected to various quite invasive demands, like being forced to being hide behind a cardboard box with a gap for her face, which she can barely reach. Carrying this hugely precarious platter that's like falling off every second she has it. She's left on stage on her own while quite violent characters come on and she's forced to hide underneath the table. And this really creates comedy because the audience is rooting for the audience, believes she's one of their own. And she's quite uncomfortable being on stage. At the climax of this maximum lasso, as Maran mentioned, she's doused with water and a fire extinguisher, and she's let off stage by a stagehand. It does seem like realistic improv because she's acting as though she's completely out of her depth, and her favorite dress is just between because she goes on stage with a very beautiful dress as if she's on a date or something of the sort. But you do realize at the end of the scene that she is an audience plant and a member of the cast, not an actual audience member whose day was just completely ruined by this play.
Right. So another time where a lasso was used was when James Corden as Francis asked the audience if anyone had a sandwich. And to his apparent cons- consternation, someone actually had a sandwich, a hummus sandwich of all things. He proceeded to berate the audience member for butting in and derailing the plot, and the lines of one of his fellow actors in an off the cut in an off the cut cuff and disorganized way. After doing some research, I learned that the hummus sandwich audience member was also a plant in the audience. These plants in the audience were there to create an illusion of an experience unique to that night and make the show seem more interactive. The minimal lasso, which I mentioned earlier, are plenty. In fact, the play is full of physical comedy, which has been painstakingly choreographed and amazingly timed. In the opening moments of the show, James Corden somersaults over an armchair, and before the play is over, he has punched himself in the face with a dustbin lid, slapped himself multiple times, and caught his own nose into a mousetrap.
Actually, like, imagine these are actually really, really hard to choreograph because if you got this exactly to the point, and then you have to go ahead and not hurt yourself while doing it. So it's not as slapdash as you might think. It's actually been choreographed really, really many times. And the beauty of all this is you can never tell when it's been choreographed well because the best choreography here looks natural. And you also see this with an old waiter, Alfie, who's quite a sympathetic but running comedy gag throughout. Tom Eden plays this wild-eyed and slow-moving octogenarian waiter who's enlisted to help Francis serve his two governors, lunch of soup, cold cuts, and chicken balls. And while he's thrown down the stairs, suffers a heart attack, he's whacked with swords, and all throughout the audience feels for him, but he's also the butt of every single joke throughout that entire scene in the restaurant.
Now, I'd like to talk about the themes of jealousy, old age, dishonesty, and love, which have been used in this play to create comedy. Richard Bean, after Goldini, has retained some themes which were popular with the commedia dell'arte audiences in the 18th century. Main themes include, as I said, jealousy, which is demonstrated when Francis meets Dolly. He thought her to be married and was jealous of that. It's also demonstrated when Alan is jealous of Rachel Crabby, who he believes to be Roscoe, who is marrying who was supposed to be marrying the love of his life, Polly. Old age is another theme that's demonstrated through the use of Alfie, as Rehan mentioned earlier, and the physical comedy that came along with it. Love is the last main theme in the play that's used. There are three main love interests, and they are Stanley and Rachel, Alan and Pauline, and Francis and Dolly.
Yeah. These sort of themes themselves presented and originated way back in ancient Greece, as all theatrical elements seem to have, along with Shakespeare, back in ancient Greece, and they were passed on, through the Romans and then through the Renaissance to the present day. Scattered through the plot lines of these plays are those we woven into and those completely irrelevant to the plot line. They have old gags and punchlines, as well as very contemporary jokes and political satire, which Bean has this combination of jokes, some of which are reminiscent of, gags at the very end of the pier, very casual, slightly brash stand-up gigs, and some of which are quite politically motivated. Um, you think, in conclusion, and Maran's going to talk about what this play could have done even better because Maran's just really that good at this play. uh, we like to think that Man Two Guvnors really does employ all these techniques in the commedia dell'arte genre work. And then it uses archetypes. It has all these different kinds of very well choreographed lazzo. And this they look like, and some which actually are improvisation. and it takes these all through the themes of love, old age, and jealousy to create a very entertaining 2.5 hours.
So the one thing which I would have done differently to reflect on play is I would have used a bit more of implicit comedy. The majority of the comedy that's used in this play is very direct. Wh- While Bean has used a little bit of historification, which means jokes built on around the dramatic irony of the audience being more knowledgeable than the characters. For example, Dolly's prediction in Act 2 that one day there will be a liberal woman prime minister. I feel that if more similar humor was used throughout the play, it could have been a better production in terms of the comedy.
And now what Mayan's just mentioned, dramatic irony again, uh, is actually this tool that's used by writers, sometimes create tension and sometimes create comedy. For example, there's a bucket on a door, just waiting to fall, and your favorite bumbling character just walking, just about to open the door. Now the audience can see this bucket, and he knows that the moment the door opens, this bucket's going to fall straight on our favorite character and just get completely doused. The character doesn't know this, and so the audience, in this state of greater knowledge, is looking at dramatic irony because you, as the audience, know something which the character doesn't, and so you're anticipating something. So in this case, it's comedy. If, for example, it's a spy thriller where one spy is defected to the, let's say, uh, Soviet side, because we're doing Cold War now, and the main character doesn't know this, the main character still trusts their friend who's now defected and is walking into a confrontation with them. The audience knows that the defected spy is going to turn on them. The main character doesn't. And this is tension because the main character is going along as if nothing has changed, while the audience knows that something is going to upset the status quo. And that is dramatic irony. Maran, if you want to talk a little bit more about Lazzo, because we have some very interesting points to tell you.
Right. So I think we spoke about Lazzo earlier, but another point is that traditionally a Harlequin character would have over 100 Lazzi at his disposal. All the other characters would recognize that the Lazzi, um, as the character decided to perform one, they would immediately recognize the role that they had to play in the improvisation and go along with it. This was used in the 17th century, 1600s in Italy, when Commedia dell'arte was used.
And there you have it. That is One Man, Two Guvnors, a very British interpretation of an Italian commedia dell'arte classic, which James Corden does mention, ribbing on the pseudo-intellectual members of the crowd who wanted to impress their dates about the format and structure of commedia dell'arte, breaking the fourth wall and talking about the structure of their play himself. It is a very good performance. If you want to laugh, please do check it out. It's One Man, Two Guvnors, directed by Nicholas Heitner and written by Richard Bean. Manan, do you want to conclude?
That's it. I think you did it very well. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.